I think when it comes to the future of power, power needs to be shared. And that's a challenge for us. So the future of power is collaboration, and collaboration is freaking hard. It's really hard. And it's going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, sitting with, these are my rank values, those are your rank values. How do we bridge that? How do we find a way forward together? That hard, heart-centered work is the work that we need to take in order to us to move through these complex challenges. And I think that's where we need to put our work and effort into, is learning how to do that. Because when we can do that, we can tackle a lot of the complex systems challenges that we're facing. But it starts with listening and understanding.
My name is Simon Waller, and this is the Future with Friends podcast, the show where I make zero attempt to try and predict the future, even though I'm a trained futurist, and instead I enlist my friends to do it for me. Thankfully, I have some very smart and insightful friends. Some of them are best-selling authors. Most will be considered leading thinkers in their field of expertise. I guarantee that every single one of them will have compelling and unique insights to share about what might happen next. Each episode, I invite a friend onto the show to explore the future of anything that they would like. I then task them to go away and create a short scenario about that future set at least 5 years from now, something that captures their hopes and dreams or maybe their fears and concerns. And then over the course of the show, we dissect that scenario. We start to think about the critical uncertainties, the alternate possibilities, and the decisions that we can make today to create the future that we want tomorrow. Welcome to The Future with Friends. Welcome to episode 15 of The Future with Friends. Today I'm being joined by a dear friend of mine, Zoe Routh. Zoe and I have known each other for about a decade or so, and she is potentially the most overqualified guest that I've ever had on the show. Not only does Zoe have her own podcast where she's recorded over 400 episodes, she's also the author of a number of speculative fiction or science fiction book. If you really want to niche it down, it's climate fiction with a techno-thriller angle to it. But in some ways, these are hugely elaborate scenarios that have been playing out over a series of now 5 books. And so having someone who is both so deeply knowledgeable about podcasting, plus also has written these amazing scenarios, having her was a guest that I couldn't wait to have on the show. Zoe explores the future of power, and this is something that's deep in both her work, in her science fiction writing work, but also in the work that she does in the leadership development space. And today we get this beautiful little snippet of what the future of power might look like. And it sits as this some amazing concepts we explore around things like spiral dynamics and the evolution of human consciousness, and how power might play out in different types of futures, and the tension that we might experience in terms of a clash between different cultural norms and groups that we already start to see in our society today. The scenario is beautifully written, amazingly read, and deeply researched. To be honest, if there was only one criticism I have of this podcast episode, it was like about an hour too short. There was so much more for Zoe and I to talk about that we didn't really kind of get to in the end. But I'm going to let you judge that for yourself. Jump into the podcast episode. I think you're going to love it. Welcome again to The Future with Friends. Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of The Future with Friends. Today, I'm being joined by a very old, very dear friend of mine, Zoe Routh. And Zoe and I first met, well, it would be about, I reckon, 12, 13 years ago in a little community called Thought Leaders. Do you remember those days, Zoe?
Yeah, they were pretty intense and significant
Yeah.
and momentous. So absolutely, I remember meeting you. It was 2015, my first year in the community.
2015, it was for your first year.
Yeah, so I think
So
you
I
were
must have been already in it for
already.
a year or so, a
Yeah.
year or two before you arrived.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was like, you're not the first person from Thought Leaders to have made it onto the podcast. And I do remember, as much as anything, my joy of that time is the community of people that you got to spend time with. Like it was definitely a community that attracted a certain type of person, often people who had big ideas and potentially a desire or almost like a drive to be able to articulate them and share them with others. So perhaps entirely unsurprising that a couple of guests have made it to the podcast.
Absolutely. I made some excellent friends there, and that sense of community and collaboration was essential to help grow my thought leadership practice as well as bolster my confidence and conviction in what I was doing. And just really, there's just some amazing people around. And so I'm forever grateful for that experience. You being one of them, of course. And we did some great collaborations since our first meeting there, which have been
Yeah,
awesome.
like, well, when I went into that, I didn't really know. I thought I knew a bit about a lot, but found out that I didn't actually know much about anything. And I I think it must have been only around that time that I was really trying to establish myself as a keynote speaker.
Hmm.
So that's a decade or so ago. And you were actually one of the people who gave me, I know, one of my breaks, one of my big breaks. You actually had your own leadership conference at the time was it Future of Leadership? Sorry, no, it's Edge of Leadership. Yeah. Which you host up in Canberra. And you actually invited me to be a speaker on your event, which, as I said at the time, felt really significant to me. That first of all, when you're in that early stages, you're very grateful for people putting their faith and their trust in you. But for someone like you to put your faith and trust in me actually meant a lot. Actually, I have a lot of respect for you and the work you do in the leadership space. And yeah, I was pretty chuffed to be invited to be a part of that.
Oh, you're so welcome. And it was a privilege to have you be part of that event. And I know people got huge amounts of value out of that. About conversations about the future and technology that they weren't having yet or was overwhelming at that time. Well, I think it probably still is overwhelming at the time and still relevant. It's just the topics, the specific nitty gritty has evolved since 2017.
Yeah, and this is interesting. We're here to talk about a scenario that you've written, and there is, as people will find out very soon, there's a whole bunch of different tech-related concepts that appear in it.
Hmm.
I do, like since coming on, and doing that keynote for you, my work has kind of evolved a little bit, or you could even say it's devolved a little bit in the sense that I've actually gone back to some of the work I used to do at Rio Tinto years and years ago around scenarios and this idea that the future becomes a safe space to have difficult conversations or confronting conversations. And I do think that at the time when I came and did that keynote, I was shared there, I suppose, shared a whole bunch of different technology tools and how this has changed the way we work. And for a lot of people, when you confront them in the moment that all this stuff exists, you are kind of now having to deal with this level of change in your work. That's hard. I definitely increasingly find that this stuff that's more narrative driven, future focused, provides almost like a safer way or a place to play with these ideas and what would that mean for us and how would it change the way I work in a way that's a lot safer than perhaps what I used to do. And I feel that this might be an idea that you agree with.
Mm, absolutely. That was kind of the impetus behind starting to write fiction. So I've been writing nonfiction leadership books for 5 or 10 years, 5 or 6 years. And at that point, I'm like, would fiction be something that could capture people's hearts and minds a little bit more to help them dive into leadership practice in a different way? So I started with that as a premise and then went, the personal side of me is like, could I write a novel? That's the personal agenda. And those two things came together and I did some leadership futurist thinking work around it. And that was the genesis behind my first sci-fi series, the Gaia series.
Yeah,
Um,
so I kind of jokingly said to you before that, like, you obviously cheated before you came on the podcast. A lot of people have never written a scenario before, and you went ahead and wrote, was it, you said now it's five
yeah.
fiction,
Yeah. The fifth one's in production as we speak. Yeah.
right? So, and do you defer, like, I mean, do you distinguish between the concept of science fiction and speculative fiction? Where do you put your own work in that spectrum?
So when I was very naive, first time novel writer, I didn't know pretty much anything about the concept of genre, which was not helpful for marketing. So I finished my book, gave it to my editor, and as he was editing, I'm like, "Where do you?" I started reading about genre fiction. I'm like, "Oh my god, I have no idea how to categorize this thing," and he suggested climate fiction. I'm like, "What the hell is that?" So I had to go and read about cli-fi, and then it expanded my view about sci-fi. So as I understand it, is speculative fiction is the broad church, and underneath that is science fiction, because under speculative fiction, you can have science fiction, you can have just imagined futures. And so there's lots of the different subcategories is the idea. And even in sci-fi, there's a whole bunch of subgenres in there: military sci-fi, alien sci-fi, barbarian romance sci-fi. Like, you got it. Like, so I'm like, so I've been trying to figure out where mine kind of fits. And I think I've got dystopian edges, I've got techno-thriller edges, so, and climate fiction. So if I was to categorize, I'd be saying it's a cli-fi techno-thriller sci-fi book. So there you go. And then I was explaining this to my running friends who are readers but have no understanding of the nuance of genre, and they're like, "That sounds like a very niche market." I'm like, "Yeah, probably is." But
Yeah.
you kind of have to go broad
But
church.
but if you get niche enough, you can be the number one book on Amazon. So there's trade-offs.
Yeah, I think that game has changed quite a lot. So when I first launched, you could gamify it a little bit
Yeah.
more to hit number one in your very tiny little niche, but now they've restricted the number of categories you can go into, and it's anyway, that's an Amazon
Yeah, but
story.
I think also, that game is a game, right? And it's actually not the reason why we play, in a sense. I remember when I heard about the first book, and I was trying to think about the right adjective to describe it. Like, I thought it was like, oh, that's really brave. It's not. I actually think it's probably the right adjective I'd describe it is it's very adventurous.
Mhm.
um, in the sense that, you have such an established brand in kind of that leadership development space. Interesting enough, though, another massive part of your life's work has been with organizations like Outward Bound. So there's certainly an adventurous edge to who you are anyway. But that's how I think I framed it as like, oh, what an adventurous thing to do, to basically go, I'm going to, like, from a cold start, write sorry, how did we describe it? A cli-fi techno-thriller novel, right? Um, can you tell us a little bit about, what that was like, the first one? I imagine the first one would have felt really kind of almost like awkward to translate from writing. Obviously, you already had a handful of non-fiction books, leadership books. What was that like to transition into that fiction space?
So parts of it were easy. So in all my nonfiction books, all the case studies and stories were kind of mini versions of a novel, if you like. So you had main characters, they've got a challenge, they resolve it somehow. And that's essentially what a novel is. You're following trajectory of one or more people who have a goal, they have a lot of obstacles, and they get to an ending point, either successful or not. If you're going to just summarize what a work of fiction could be. That's the genre fiction. Literary fiction is something different altogether, but similar. You have people, they go through stuff. It's either good or bad. Something happens in the end, hopefully, unless it's orbital, which is just a description of the people going around the planet in the International Space Station that won the Booker Prize this year. We'll just park that for the second. So that was what the similar things are, is just expanding on a story. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff. I'm like, I wonder if there's a template in Scrivener, my novel writing or my book writing software for novels. So you pull it up. I'm like, oh, fancy that. Other people have thought about that. So there was character pages, there was place settings. I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot more to this than I possibly thought. And so as I'm writing the story and ideas for it, I'm also at the same time reading about how to write a novel and all the structures that go into it. And I went, right, okay. So I then found a developmental editor, and I gave him the first 30,000 words before I committed to going down this track. I'm like, have I got any talent here, any hope of being successful? So he did a big critique of it, which he tore apart a few of my main premises, which I had to sit for a while thinking about, his impression of X, Y, and Z. So one of the characters in particular, his trajectory changed radically after that. And also the flavor of the book and trying to speak to genre. So there was a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know that I wrestled with and kind of worked my way through. But I did know the story I wanted to tell in terms of theme. I wanted to discuss the future of leadership, the future of power in these different driving trends that we saw, climate being one of them, which is, I think, why my editors thought climate fiction, because climate played such a huge piece of the driver in that first novel and continuing into the other ones. So that was one of the elements. So it was a massive scenario plan, and then taking characters and bringing them to life and making sure that it's a good read for readers so that they felt like they could experience some of that lessons and challenges alongside, which is what makes good fiction, in my opinion, that you go on these emotional journeys alongside the characters, either hating or loving them, but getting something of value from it.
Yeah, I talk about the concept of scenarios as being fiction based in fact.
Hmm.
So it's basically extrapolating out some of the technologies or the cultural shifts or the environmental changes that we're experiencing and extrapolate them out into a particular direction and going, what might this combination of factors result in?
Mm.
And let's
Yeah.
tell a story about that. Yes, use the power of narrative to be able to engage an audience in these ideas. I definitely picked up in reading some of your books, like, yeah, the leadership angle, um, your kind of your work certainly comes through in it. It's almost like there's a level of no, I think we talked about this. You didn't like the idea that it's a parable as such,
Oh,
but there's a
yeah, no,
but
no
there is
merit.
a lesson to be learned, or there is something to be reflected on that is bigger than just the story itself. Is that fair enough to say?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of writers bring a moral imperative or moral perspective to their work. And certainly the books that resonate with people have something in there. It's not always slamming it against your head, which is what I think parables are. It's just can't do it. It's just like it's just too obvious. And I think in my first novel, I think I just a little bit too obvious on reflection, like having written 4 since that first one. It's like probably didn't need to shove it down people's throats so much, but I don't know if I shoved it down their throats, but it was just a little bit too overt, in my opinion. Now, looking back on that, maybe I have to go back and reread it. I haven't read that first book in 3 years, so I'm like, maybe it's not as bad as I'm imagining it to be. But there was some deliberate things in terms of the conversations the leaders have about selecting their staff to go and build the prototype for the base on the moon. You know, they wanted a combination of particular skills, and there was a conversation about skills versus potential, which is a great leadership conversation. And then there's comparison to other leaders who are doing different things or different strategies and how that plays out. There's a whole section on leadership maturity, which is taken directly from the work that I do as a leadership expert, talking about people's different perspectives and development and what's possible for them. So yeah, those threads are definitely in there, and that felt like that felt like a good expression of helping people explore some of those big ideas, which is what I do in boardrooms and different programs with leaders and their teams.
Yeah. I always remember back into my English literature days when I was kind of year 11, 12, and you read these kind of, classic fiction pieces, whether it be Shakespeare or Wordsworth or whatever, and you'd be asked to make this interpretation around what the words mean.
Hmm.
And on one hand, like, I suppose it's entirely legitimate for everybody to make their own interpretation of what the words mean. But at the same time, you're always like, oh, am I really giving a meaning to this that is entirely different from what the author intended? Um, the benefit, obviously, of today is that we have the author of the scenario here on the podcast. And so we'll get just to ask you directly. We're going to jump into it in a sec, but beforehand, obviously, when we spoke about this, obviously I said, look, hey, Zoe, you can talk about the future of absolutely anything that you want. And you ruminate on this a little bit, but you come together with this scenario. What would you say this is the future of?
Future of power.
The future of power.
Hmm.
And is there a particular reason, like, why that topic? Why, if you could have chosen to talk about the future of anything, you chose power?
I've been obsessing about that topic since I wrote People Stuff in 2020. So that is a nonfiction book. And in my research around that book, I read a lot about power and how it's deployed, abused, etc., in leadership scenarios and how it affects people and how they show up and how they interact with each other. And I thought back then, I'm like, we really need to change our relationship to power, understand it better. In fact, I'm trying to think who is it that talked about power literacy. Alicia McKay. She did a whole thing about power literacy on her Substack recently. I'm like, Yeah, that's basically I wish I'd have that title. That would have been a really good book title.
Alicia does that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's definitely the case. We're not as leaders, like the leaders I work with aren't they know when power is being misused, abused, when it's directed against them. They're not necessarily aware when they do it. And I think this is part of the conversation. We need to know about power, how it affects us, how we can use it better, how we can develop and deploy it in a useful way. So that started the genesis of fascination with power, oligarchies, and also autocracy. So I went into down that political side of things, looking at how power is used and abused by people in positions of great authority at a national, global scale. And for me, it became an urgent thing. I'm like, if it's happening at that global scale, it's happening on a micro level. And my research for my next nonfiction book, which came out this year, Power Games, was based around that. Uh, Discovering that everybody I spoke to had experienced some sort of power abuse and how debilitating those experiences were. And I just got really crushed by that. It's like, because I'm naturally an optimist. And I think through the conversations and research around power, I've become a tempered optimist. So I still believe that we have a
A
possible
rational optimist.
I don't know.
Like-
I don't even know it's rational optimist, but I think the shine has gone off. Like
Yeah.
optimists tend to have great, beautiful, bright colored glasses on. I think, oh, there's less of a shine now. I think discovering that psychopaths are real and the kind of damage they can do in workplaces was sobering for me, and how many of them get to positions of influence and authority, I think, was pretty scary. So that sort of started that's been ongoing conversation for me and discussions and research since 2020 up until now. And I wanted to explore that in my novels as well. How are the different approaches to power playing out in characters and their interactions and their decisions for better or good? And that sort of, when you said, what do
Yeah.
you want to talk about? I'm like, future of power. Because I
Perfect.
have a philosophy about where I would like it to go. And I don't think there's a linear projection towards that. I think it's going to be a struggle to get
Well,
to.
let's park that, because
Okay,
I think when
parking it.
people hear the scenario, that will make a lot more sense. And I think will give us a lot of material to work with in that conversation.
Yeah.
Last thing, so the year you've chosen, 2055, so 20 years from now. Is that right?
I can't remember. Like, is
Yeah,
that
let's say it was.
20 or
Because this is
30
what
years?
you did
Okay.
write it on the top of the scenario. But
Did I? Okay.
yeah,
20,
but
20
years from now, and again, I
Yeah.
find this an interesting time frame where it's again far enough away we can imagine something to be a little bit different, but anchored very much still in some of the conversations and the technologies and the things that are going on right now. Was there any other significance to the time frame for you, apart from trying to find that space where you could be expressive in the scenario, but also connected to the present? What else came up for you in that time frame?
This is maybe the realist optimist. How realistic is it that we're going to get to Mars in the next couple of years? I'm like, I don't think it's going to be that realistic to build a community on Mars in the next 5 years, despite what Elon Musk spruiks. And that's based on a lot of research I've done around what it will take to establish a community either on the moon or Mars or both. And the obstacles are incredible. And will we be able to do it? Will we have the political, financial, economic will to do it? I don't know. I suspect it might take more than 10 years. It might take more than 20 years. So
Well, I think with that, the scene has been set. And we're now going to throw to you, Zoe. You're going to read your scenario from the beginning all the way through to the end. The microphone is all yours.
Thank you. Lincoln Ellison pulled his silver-plated comb through the helmet of his hair, smoothing every strand until it gleamed. He smiled and checked his teeth. White as sheets, chiseled, symmetrical, lustrous. He breathed into his palm. Minty fresh. Good. Excellent. All the anti-aging protocols, the optimization regimens, the endless tweaks, working. Mr. Ellison, they're ready for you now. His assistant, the Doppelbot Caesar, bowed and held the door for him. Lincoln savored the deference. Critics had mocked him for reprogramming an AI based on Julius Caesar into servitude. But really, humility would have done the old general some good. Hubris had left Caesar bleeding on a Senate floor. But today was Lincoln's triumph, his metaphorical lap of glory around Rome. His empire, spaceward bound, was unveiling planetary-scale air purification. No more sulfur dust bowls, no more acid rain. Soon, clean skies, clean lungs. Lincoln's smile broadened. Water salinity? They'd already solved it. Potable water scarcity was about to be a thing of the past. With their squeeze on the helium-3 mining operations on the moon, Spaceward Bound had the resources to offer an abundance of air, water, and energy. They could reverse the worst effects of industrial climate change. Better yet, they could make the planet better, a better climate, a healthier environment, a more peaceful world. He could almost weep. Standing in the wings of the giant stage, Spaceward Bound logo floating around a holographic Earth, Moon, and Mars, he took a few steadying breaths as the host read out his introduction and his long list of accolades. There were, of course, a few hurdles to overcome. Lincoln's mind batted each thought away as it arose. Competitive water purification tech from Ariana Industries. His spies claimed it was 10 times faster than their own. But his lawyers had that tied up in a bogus patent claim, thank goodness. Then the specter of the Lunar Commission finding out about their helium-3 skimming. But the biggest risk right now was Dr. Victoria Tang, still unwilling to sign over her air scrubber invention. Lincoln preferred persuasion over coercion, but things were on a timeline now. Please, welcome to the stage, Lincoln Ellison! A roar erupted. Lincoln strode to the center of the platform, palms pressed together in saintly gratitude. Friends, we are on the cusp of humanity's greatest leap forward. His voice boomed and tingles rushed from his crown to toes. We brought you abundant energy with helium-3. We delivered clean water with Prima Aqua, and now clean air with the Alveus biogenic cartridge. Dr. Victoria Tang is now working with Spaceward Bound to manufacture and produce the scrubber so we can bring clean air, first to the worst affected areas like Post Seco, and then for the entire planet. Thunderous applause. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "At what price? We can't afford your water, let alone your air." Lincoln kept his smile unassailable. The Doppelbot security would soon silence the heckler. But we have bigger aspirations. Pause for dramatic effect. While we heal Earth, we go to Mars. Lights flashed, cheers surged. Lincoln wondered if the lights would cast a sheen on his forehead. He felt the prickle of sweat at his collar as he stood in the tractor beam of the floodlights. In 6 months, we will be launching the first human mission to Mars. With Dr. Tang's Alveus cartridge, the Chinese Doppelbot base is ready to receive the first pioneers. At long last, we are ready to amend the Mars Accord and send humans to the Red Planet, humanity's next frontier. Spaceward Bound is taking applications for the first settlers. Bounders will have first right of application as company employees, and as the first Martians, you'll each have your own habitat dome. All modcons, built and powered by Spaceward Bound. As the first pioneers, you'll be able to claim mineral rights. Spaceward Bound will supply you with all the manufacturing and mining bots you need to build your own enterprise. In the meantime, we'll be activating the air scrubbers to get the terraforming done. Breathable air, planet-wide within a generation. "You'll make us slaves on a planet with no laws," someone shouted. A scuffle rippled through the crowd. His smile didn't waver. "Mars is our next frontier." He spread his arms wide to embrace the cheering crowd. "I offer wealth, prosperity, where a man, or woman," he added hastily, "with hard work and focus can build abundance." Then, somewhere closer, a voice that raked claws on his consciousness, the warning to Caesar and generals past. "Memento mori, Allison, memento mori."
Look, the 5 books of practice have certainly paid off. This is fantastic and beautifully delivered, by the way. I love, like not just like the intonations and stuff, but the hand gestures and all the rest of it. Like, if you ever needed another career, I reckon primary school teacher reading to kids, nail it.
Okay. Not sure they would go in for power abuse stories, but well, anyway.
um, as I said, like this is you shared this with me about a week or so ago, and it was kind of like, oh hey, like here's the first crack at it type thing. I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like you don't have to do anything. This is just so well done. Um, I almost like don't know where to start. Part of me wants to start at the end, but before we get to that bit, can we just talk a little bit about you? You obviously not new to this in terms of writing it. Do you have a like when I gave you this as a task or a thing to do for the podcast? What was the process you went through to get from here's this idea I want to write this scenario about the future of power to having this delivered?
I went through you because you proposed using ChatGPT to go through a bunch of questions to produce a scenario. So I did that, and which was a fabulous process, by the way. I really enjoyed that. If you don't have that published somewhere for people, I think you ought to. It's really helpful. And I came up with, I had a bunch of different scenarios I could list out and play with. And there was, there were so many, like I could have written half a dozen of these really. Like there was the one I ended up going with was techno-feudalism, which is this scenario. But there was sovereign citizens, there was direct democracy, there's a whole bunch of other ones as well in there, which I think were all really useful. And in the end, I'm like, I'm just going to make this easier for myself. And I took this particular theme and story is out of the latest book, Olympus Dawn, which is in production at the moment. So this particular scene is not in the book. It's alluded to in the book where he does actually he's skimming helium-3 off the moon operation. So he's doing something illegal there. He actually has water tech but Ariana Industries has got a better thing and he ties that up. So he manages to railroad and control both energy and water. And then the air tech purifier, he steals. So that's a little, is that well, you kind of read it in the first chapter anyway. So he gets control of all this stuff. And there's a race to Mars now because the tech has been developed on Mars. And he knows that Mars is going to be the next Earth. And so it is ripe for wealth and prosperity and abundance. And so I'm like, right, what does this look like in terms of an announcement in the concept of future of power? And so the announcement thing was just fun, tying all those elements together. The future of power really is expressed in the techno-feudalism future that Lincoln Ellison represents. And it's not the only future that is explored in Olympus Dawn, but it's the one that's kind of malevolent. And that's the one I wanted to explore because there's a trajectory that can take us down that path. And I think at the same time, there's an alternative trajectory. And
Yeah. So there's a couple of things I pick up in there. So one, I think that's so beautiful that this kind of sits alongside the books that you've written, almost like it's an unseen chapter or it's an unseen scene of it. And that people who have read the books could read this and see how that's very cool, by the way. I just think that's awesome. Second of all, I think the thing you pointed out there about this is one of many possible futures that we could have. And I think it's been alluded to before on the podcast, but when you do scenario planning on a more rigorous level, you would never write just one scenario because by writing just one scenario, you're actually biasing people towards that particular outcome, as opposed to acknowledging the general uncertainty of the future, which means there are multiple outcomes we need to consider. So I think that's obviously the process that you've gone through and gone, yeah, there's different ways this could unfold. Here's one particular way. And now I've chosen that pathway. I'm going to create this alignment between this and this kind of, this world of characters and storylines that you have actually used in your own book. So I think that's very, very powerful as a way of going about this.
Could I add something also?
Yeah.
Which I bring to the imagination of these possible futures through a mental model of developmental leadership maturity. So this is again, I have to be, as a leadership practitioner, I'm very conscious that this mental model informs a lot of the way that I decipher and think about people dynamics as well as any sort of future-based topic. And what I mean by that is that developmental models showcase how we can mature and expand our worldviews and our action logics as we mature and grow as individuals. And that's one of the things I wanted to explore across the books as well, different stages of leadership maturity and how they respond to the challenges, and are they up for the challenges that are on the table. So I have that being brought to the table as well. And when I look at possible futures and I see it playing out in the culture wars, is there really different value systems that are struggling with one another? So, and I think that struggle will continue. I don't know how it's going to be resolved. Like, that's the unknown piece for me. And you can look at, well, how does the culture, how does our culture move through these culture wars and resolve differences or heal the downsides of each of the perspectives? That's the work we have to do as a collective, and that's sort of sitting underneath all of this as well. Um,
Yeah, and I do wonder whether or not the objective of resolution is an unrealistic one in and of itself. Like, I think part of the way that humans operate is we like to simplify things
mhm,
so that we can make sense of them.
mhm,
So we like the idea that something is either um, binary, like unresolved, and then it gets resolved,
mm,
but in truth, there is no solutions, there's only trade offs. And so when you actually get to the end of one thing, you create the foundation of a new thing to emerge. So
mhm.
there's no like every finish is just the point on another journey, like it's the start of another journey, right?
I agree with that, and the developmental models say the same. Every new stage you move into has its downsides, and that propels growth, hopefully, or regression. And I think
Yeah.
that
Or even then, I think
oscillation.
you look at some of the challenges going on in the world right now and some of the conflict, say, for instance, in Eastern Europe,
Mhm,
we felt this was resolved at the end of World War II.
mm.
But what we actually had already done is sowed the seeds of the next conflict. And so I think that that's something I think that's really powerful in this. So can you tell us a little bit in that developmental model? Are there particular stages that you have tried to represent in this scenario?
Yes, perhaps not as classic archetypes, but elements of that. So Lincoln Ellison is the bad guy, if you want to diminish it or distill it down to that. So he is the antagonist. He has got a particular view of the world, which is about aggrandizement and wealth accumulation. So he's got two kind of active paradigms in his profile. Through the spiral dynamics lens, if you're familiar with that, he's red orange. If you're ego leadership maturity, it's very much about opportunist and achiever. So he's very much about wealth, pragmatic acceleration, not at all about community and integration and environmentalism. That's He's got a very extractive worldview. So people and things and planets are resources to be taken advantage of. So it has very much grounded in that kind of it's almost like a commercial view of the world, which kind of strangles any other opportunity. Plus, he's a psychopath, so he's got no empathy. So I've definitely placed him as a psychopath in there. So he's quite a challenging character. But psychopaths are also incredibly influential and charismatic. And I'm not sure I made him charismatic enough. 'Cause
Yeah, so I was wondering about this. There's actually one of the first notes I wrote here was like, oh, I wonder who are the avatars or do they exist? Are there avatars in the real world that you have drawn on for this character? And obviously, the easy, obvious one might be someone like Elon Musk because of his obsession with taking us to Mars.
Oh, well, look, okay, let's take Elon and put him on the table because he's quite an interesting character. So he's yes, his Mars ambitions, and if you take his rationale for why Mars, it's very different to Lincoln's. As far as what Elon has said publicly, his mission for Mars is to help humanity survive itself, beyond this planet. So he sees the future of consciousness, the future of humanity. That is something worth preserving, which means we need to get off Earth because Earth has a finite trajectory, and also it's hugely at risk, either from human generated climate change, as an example, or just a big, massive asteroid coming to destroy it. So he's like, let's get off the planet. We need to put our toehold out into into other areas so that humanity and consciousness survive. So that's his mission. That is not Lincoln Ellison's. Lincoln Ellison is, I want to live for a long time. I want to enjoy wealth and prestige. So there's an ego aspect to it. There's a wealth accumulation aspect to it. So there's elements of Elon that go into that. There's elements of Jeff Bezos that go into him. Um, those are the two primary ones. Let me see, who else did I put into that one? All of my characters kind of become their own thing once you start
Mm,
exploring their world, because their world helps create and foster them at the same time. So, as much Elon has no charisma as well as charisma, like he has devotees, and I think Lincoln Nelson has devotees as well. Somebody who can master business in the way that he has, which is what makes techno-feudalism such uh, exciting and sexy for some leaders, is that they can start to control so many different resources for the advancement of their own cause. And when you look at the signals and research I did for this scenario, like that I've been watching, how big corporations are setting up their own nuclear powered generators so that they can create their own AI databases. This is taking over from what traditionally has been the world of government. So the organizations, global enterprises like Microsoft, like Google, are becoming a world unto themselves. The fact that Apple has so much wealth, way more than any other country, those are massive signals. Like techno-feudalism is the
mm.
way forward, and how where governments can't keep pace with the demands of these big enterprises, they've stepped in. They've started building housing or influencing housing agenda, building their own power supply. As I said, sometimes they have their own little mini cities. That's happening. Tesla and SpaceX are doing that, as well as, if you look at, I think Facebook, Meta has its own little community too, and developing housing estates as well. And even here in Australia, Atlassian has its own kind of mini village, if you like. So there's big, massive signals saying, hey, we're going down this road.
So can we pause on that idea
Yeah.
for a second? Because
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
something I picked up as well. And there's other very high profile versions of that. I think even if you look to, say, for instance, things like the line,
Yeah.
as being this kind of utopian, techno feudal development.
But that's a government run one, right?
That is government run,
Yeah.
yeah. But that aside, one of the things that I kind of picked up, and almost in the way that Lincoln Ellison talks about Mars, it's done through the lens of this is a greenfields project. So there's nothing there. We're going to make this idealistic thing out of nothing. Okay. And I find this happens a lot in these kind of conversations. Is the issue is everything that humanity has ever done until this point, right? Like society is the problem. The existing infrastructure is the issue. And so we're going like, if you could just start from scratch, if we could just raise the ground and start from scratch, we could build something better. And I think it's interesting that, like, in the sense that on one hand, how overly simplistic that premise is, that somehow you could erase all of human history just by building something in a greenfield environment. But second of all, that
can I
you could
just
do something better than all of the evolution of human history combined. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
That's not Lincoln Ellison's agenda, though. He's not selling utopia. He's selling opportunity.
Yeah.
So he's saying, look, there's a huge amount of, like, just kind of the pioneer component is what's really driving him. It's not like, let's set up a new community. Now, the utopian vision is what goes for the protagonists. So the idea of setting up colonies on the moon. So Maya Garcia and Gaia Enterprises and Arianda Industries, that's the alternative worldview. And they very much have a collective utopian vision of what they could create, both on Earth and then the moon and then on Mars. So it's kind of, that's the competing worldview that's going there. And I don't think that they're saying we can erase all of human history with the ups and downs of that, though I think they're probably more optimistic than they anticipated. Like their utopian world vision is tempered with the reality of pushback of earlier stages of leadership maturity, which are extractive and commercial, as opposed to collective and community. So it's this tug of war between these different developmental edges that is continuing to play out across planets in this particular scenario. But I hear you, though, like and I've listened to some of your other interviews with other optimists who have these utopian visions of what's possible. I'm like, and yeah, we're still bags of bone and water with the same kind of drivers that's the real work that we bring all of that to the table still. Just because we set up a new infrastructure or a new whether it's the line or whatever, people are going to still show up with all the stuff that keeps us fighting and screwing forward, as to misquote somebody else.
Yeah, but also even in that sense, like we see it as baggage. Like we see it as being a negative thing that, oh, if only we didn't have to deal with that, this would be so much easier, as opposed to actually seeing it through like a positive lens of like it's not baggage, it is like our collective human, like, if you talk about baggage is my belongings, like it's the stuff that has built us and created us and informed us and inspired us. It is every story and everything. Do you mean like we can look at that idea of it being baggage, but baggage has a negative connotation to it. I mean, what do you call that same stuff when we actually look at it through a positive lens?
I call it
And
upside downside. It's not baggage. It's just all of us. If again, through the developmental model, each stage has an upside, something positive to bring to the table, and it has an Achilles heel. And when it comes to talking about the future of power, the same is true. I don't think we're ever going to resolve, fix, complete our work around power. It's part of an earlier stage of leadership maturity. And I think we have an allergy to the downsides, which allows it to get repressed and then expressed in negative ways. And I think that's the work is shadow work, really. It's understanding the downsides and being able to see that they're there and know that if we allow them to, they can take the reins. But we don't want to allow them to. We want to integrate that. We want to have positive self-expressions of power while mitigating and managing the upswell of the downsides. I think that's probably a more useful frame to look at than the baggage out. Like, no, I think it all comes with us.
yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's like, again, we have a tendency to try and find simple solutions to difficult problems.
Yeah.
So we kind of go like, oh, if I could just get rid of the baggage, this would be so much easier. Like we kind of like, it's kind of almost like the game that our mind plays on us. It tries to find simple things to actually, as I said, what is a complex evolutionary process.
And now a word from our future sponsors.
The global water crisis solved. Clean, perfect hydration, always on demand. But somewhere between survival and perfection, we lost the taste of living. Remember the rusty tang of your childhood tap? The metallic sting of Dad's garden hose? The sweet algae bloom from Grandma's rain barrel? At Sipback, we believe water should have character. That's why we invented depurification technology, restoring the imperfections you didn't know you missed. And now, the Sipback Post-Mix Tap, delivering iconic flavors straight from your tap. Mix, match, rotate, rediscover the water you remember, or never knew you missed. Choose from over 200 flavor profiles including Melbourne Chlorine Classic, Mumbai Monsoon Street, Rio Rainforest Mist, Tokyo Tap Water Twist, Sahara Oasis, Hint, Iceland Glacial Drip, Amazon River Sweet, and Sydney Harbor Saline. Sit back, taste the past. Pour it, mix it, live it.
So funny enough, I hadn't touched on spiral dynamics in any of these podcasts until the last one with my friend Michael Schiffner, who was actually talking about experience of going to Burning Man.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking through the lens of spiral dynamics, and you probably know this better than I do. It's some stuff I touched on when I did my master's maybe 10 or so years ago. But this idea that at moments in time, we get to see a vision of the next level in the spiral. And we kind of have this moment of like, oh my God, this could be so different. And we're talking about Burning Man as being an opportunity to see an example or a glimpse of what a higher level in the spiral might look like. So we brought up spiral dynamics and the work of Claire Graves and stuff. You mentioned this in terms of Lincoln Ellison's own development as being red-orange. Again, my understanding of that in a simple sense is red is actually a collectivist, a nationalistic viewpoint. Orange is kind of individualistic, capitalistic viewpoint.
Not quite. So,
Not quite?
no, yeah. Red is power. So it's very much of individual energy and drive.
Mm-hmm.
That's where power sits in the red. The orange is the commercial stuff. And both of them are individualistic, if you like. And it's the other colors which are collectivist. So purple, blue, and green. So purple being about loyalty, tribe, paternalism. Blue being about law and order. Green being about the collectividualism. That's not a word. Collectivity, collaboration, humanism, individualism, that kind of thing. So in the spiral, we sway between the two as we go through the stages, focus on self and then focus on collective, focus on self as we grow our worldview or expand our worldview. So red and
so
orange are echoes.
where would you put Caesar on that spiral?
Well, God, he's definitely red-orange as well.
Yeah, so this is probably what I was kind of trying to. I mean, that the idea of this being an evolutionary thing,
Yeah.
spiral dynamics just shows, and obviously it's not suggesting that evolution is a consistent thing that goes up over time. But it my question, I suppose, was like, interesting that we have a character in here that is, the best part of a couple of thousand years old, Caesar, has been a character in this who would largely be seen to have similar traits to Lincoln. It's like, gosh, how much have we really evolved in the last 2,000 years? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So I'm also obsessed with ancient Rome through the power lens. And next year, I want to be writing a series based in ancient Rome. So I'm going to change genres entirely and look backwards 2,000 years to see how power played out there and what we can learn from it. And Caesar is a fascinating...
Is that hi-fi, historical fiction? Is that what it's called?
I don't think anybody calls it hi-fi. Yeah. Maybe
they will
do.
now. They will now, Zoe.
Yeah, I'm into hi-fi. Yeah, ancient Rome. So the echoes... Well, I think Caesar, like thinking about... He was a genocidal conquering general, which was part of the norm of that time. I suspect he was a psychopath as well. Like he was incredibly charismatic, and psychopaths often are. And he was a populist as well. So as a populist general, he knew how to get to the hearts and minds of the people and the hearts and minds of his soldier. And that's where he got a lot of his power, much to the chagrin and angst of the senatorial class who saw Caesar as a threat to their own property and wealth and influence. Have we evolved? Well, I think as a center of gravity, as a collective, absolutely. As communities, we have absolutely evolved. We've managed to collaborate and collectively look at the rights of fellow human beings. We don't do slaves anymore. And at the kind of scale it was 2,000 years ago, where having slaves was part of the economy and normal acceptance of the order of things, though, it ended not that long ago in the US, and it's still existing in parts around the world. So we have definitely evolved. We have things like collective welfare in different organizations. We have things like democracy. Those are absolutely huge developmental shifts as a collective. Now, that's taken a while for us to move through that. And individuals, we still have to go through each of these stages, which is very frustrating. It's like, it takes a while to go from the opportunist 2-year-old, which is all about me and my things, saying yes and no and putting down boundaries, to the evolved, wise elder who can see great complexity and navigate the kinds of challenges that we're talking about. You can't do that necessarily easily as a 14-year-old when you haven't gone through those leadership maturity stages. That's if you use the paradigm of the developmental model. So I'm just keeping that in mind,
Yeah.
That's a mental model I'm applying. So have we evolved? Absolutely. Do we still have the same challenges? Absolutely. There's psychopaths now, just as there were in Caesar's time.
Yeah, and so I suppose one of the things I reflected on when I looked at this scenario in its whole was, almost, do we have there's a systemic issue, it feels like, that encourages certain types of personalities to grow into these type of leadership roles.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be required, and I know this is kind of now outside the scope, and maybe it's a different possible scenario you could have written. What would it be required from a systemic perspective to actually facilitate the development and evolution of, the development of more evolved or more collectivist, okay, I'm biased towards the view that, a collectivist global leadership perspective is beneficial to the long-term success of humanity. I'm biased towards that, and I know there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs, and we can talk about what the negatives of that are, but do we actually have a it feels like globally around the world, not just in this scenario, but in terms of what we're dealing with right now, we're moving further away, or we've retracted from that perspective. We were heading that direction post-World War II, the development of the United Nations, global cooperation. It got used and bastardized by some global players, which has now led to what is it that systemically we could create that allows the flourishing of humanity? Yeah, is that a big question to ask?
Yeah, it's a big question, and the work is also big. So when you're looking at systemic solutions, it's not just about the infrastructure; it's what's beneath all of that. That's your meta language and your value system. And so I think that's, in terms of the culture wars, that's sort of where we're sitting. We're seeing the exposure of where those two value systems bump into each other and aren't supportive of one another. You have the collectivist versus the individual, and you can see this in the ethos and myth of America. It's like the myth of the American dream is about the individual creating prosperity and abundance for themselves if they have enough proactive initiative. That's the kind of myth of the American dream, and that is very much individualistic. And that doesn't sit very well alongside collectivists, which are the wealth and prosperity of all of us is essential, and the individual exists as part of a community to create abundance for all. So those are the competing worldviews, the competing value systems. So if you can talk about systemic change, you have to come back to that level and think, how do those two things coexist? What can we take from the best of each of them to create something new and emerging? That is incredibly difficult work, because no one actually likes to have their values challenged, because they embody them as a truth. So if you talk to a Christian fundamentalist about tradition and family and what is appropriate and proper and the right way to do things, that is an embodied truth for them. And you say, no, you're wrong. What are they going to do? They're going to say, I'm right and you are wrong. So that work of bridging the conversation about leaning into understanding each other's worldviews is really difficult work. And we need to do the work of connection and listening to be able to find a path where we can find those truths together. This is the work that I do with leaders, where I run them through different scenarios, role plays even, and say, okay, what are your values? And rank them. So when I get leaders to rank their values, this is incredibly difficult. And then I say, look at your neighbors. What are their ranked values? And like, ugh. And they go, well, they're wrong. I'm like, really? You're telling somebody that their ranked values are wrong. They're sitting around the table trying to solve the same problem of water resources, say, for example. How can you make them wrong when you're trying to share this resource and develop the future of the water and environment and community? You can't make them wrong. You have to understand. And then you have to challenge yourself to flip your own values. So, Simon, if you're sitting there going, collectivism and global solution solving is the value that I promote, what happens if you flipped it? Could you do it, at least as an intellectual exercise, and embody that empathy, that point of empathy? And it might feel like you want to vomit when you're doing that. And I think this is the work of leadership, is to be able to sit in the vomiting inducing situations and go, okay, I get it. I don't like it. And I get it. And these are my fellow human beings. What is value? Where's the value in that point of view? And I think
so some of the work that I do, which is related to that, which I think is interesting. So I often go so the values that we have are based on an interpretation of the lived experience that we have preceding it. So there's things that we see in the world. Our brains try and make sense of those things by forming patterns. We interpret those patterns to have meaning, and we give those meanings words, and we call them our values or our beliefs. So the first thing is kind of to acknowledge that other people with different lived experiences are likely to have seen different things that are equally true, but just not what we've seen. And so therefore it's quite legitimate that they also, given their selection of lived experience, would generate a belief system that may not be exactly the same as ours. So how do we actually go back to, so tell me what you've seen. How can we go back to almost strip it down to the bare bones? What were the forming experiences that led you to this path of belief, as opposed to what is the belief itself? Interesting, I think. So what I'm suggesting is not that one is right or wrong, but that we're both doing some similar work around trying to address that challenge of the conflicting beliefs and finding a way of almost like elevating the conversation beyond that.
I think that's part of the work, is that self-reflection, self-awareness piece, what led you to believe what you believe is a really useful conversation to have someone who has very different value set for you, and to sit in the curiosity around that, and rather than impose your judgment on it. It's like, oh, so you had like a right-wing upbringing. That's the way you think the way that you do, that disparaging, judgmental tone. And that is one of the downsides of individualist green stage of leadership maturity, where we think, unless you think egalitarianism, you're a doofus. So there's an embedded judgmentalism hierarchy. Even though at Green we're supposed to be anti-hierarchy, there's a hierarchy in that. Unless you believe what we do, then you're not evolved enough. And I think that kind of arrogance is what we need to unplug. And I see it a lot in leaders who are doing systems thinking, is that they're like, we just need to hurry up and rush people through this. And it's like, hang on, how much respect do you have really for the people around the table? Are you really listening to them? So,
So I think when we talk about the systemic issue, I think this sense of time constraint that is so pervasive in modern organizations is a real it stops us. It's a structural deficit that we need to overcome if we are going to find a path forward. It feels at the moment like no one seems to have the time to sit in this space and strip back some of our fundamental, or not enough people, not enough organizations seem to be willing to strip back the conversation to the point of, but let's just start at the bare bones, go back to bare metal. What have you seen? What is the foundation of those beliefs, rather than what is this, like, we almost like, but we got to get our strategy in place. Like we kind of skipping 7 steps to get there.
Yes. And at the same time, I think nature is doing a wonderful job of forcing us to the table. And if I think about my experiences working with the leaders in the environment water space, trying to solve water and environment challenges at community level has caused them to run up against brick walls. And it's only when they started to do more of a collaborative exercise and bringing more voices to the table, as messy and as challenging as that was, they actually managed to create better responses that were more systemic, bigger picture, more interconnected than if they just tried to pass legislation at a community level or a top-down level. So it's interesting how nature, as the great teacher, is saying, well, that didn't work, like the early Murray-Darling Basin plans were burnt. There was the burning of those plans in the communities because it was top-down dictated. It wasn't evolving from the people who were affected. And so the idea of looking at things systemically is actually a new emerging way of being in the world. And there's only about, according to the research, about 10 to 12 leaders who can sit in that space and be able to look at systems. So you and I having this conversation, who are grounded in this philosophy and approach and ways of being, there's not that many of us. And the good news, though, is that you only need a little bit more than 10% to start to tip the groundswell or the center of gravity in the ecosystem to change that way. So the more that we talk about this and share with people, get people thinking in this way, we have a chance of influencing the greater system and getting people to think connectively about it. The other thing I was going to say about commercialism, no, it's gone. It'll come back.
That's okay. I want to nerd out with you a little bit on this stuff, if this is okay, just a little change of tact, because what I think I really appreciate is like the depths of research that you've gone to around the technology side of this as well. And I know we had a little bit of a chat about this when I read one of your books, Terra Firma. We'll talk about some of the tech that goes in. And I read through this and I actually had to go and look up a couple of things. Because I was like, I know this is not an accident that Zoe has put this in here. But I wanted to pick up on the helium-3 mining on the moon.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this, but obviously, so helium-3 is a potential fuel for nuclear fusion,
yeah.
Fusion,
Yeah.
which is kind of the experimental technology which has been worked on around the world right now. But the big issue is, well, we need to find elements, certain feedstock for it. And it's something like on the moon, it's like significantly more abundant than it is here, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's all through the regolith on the moon. So like the dust on the moon. So you'd have to filter a lot of moon dust to get the helium-3. Now, that helium-3 tech, if you read some critics who are like, don't talk to me about helium-3, it's bullcrap. It's never going to come off. But it's like, well, what if it does? What if we evolve our technology so we can create this bountiful nuclear fusion, clean energy that would transform the planet? Really, it would transform economies. The whole power dynamic would shift. And that's sort of what I explore in Olympus Bound onwards, this helium-3 discovery, which changes the purpose of the community on the moon, by the way, which is meant to be developing communities as a Noah's Ark for Earth. And it became, now we're mining energy. So it was a massive shift. And that's something some of the characters struggle with a lot. They had this utopian collaborative vision, and now it's turning backwards, it felt like, into this commercial enterprise with lots of people wrestling for power over it. So yes, that was absolutely one of the things I researched as a driver, because if you have a new source of energy, the things that have knock-on effects around that are incredible.
Yeah, even taking out like this particular scenario, but looking at nuclear fusion on Earth, even in its current level of development, has the potential to dramatically shift power dynamics around the world. We, at the moment, have a society whereby access to energy has been a driving force around people's quality of life. And so the people who control the energy potentially have a control over or a massive influence over people's quality of life. And, at the moment, we have a relatively distributed energy infrastructure, both globally and even within a nation like Australia. There is multiple power stations and people got solar panels. And there's actually the idea that with these types of reactors are so massive and so expensive, you may not have more than one, or like that would be like such a concentration of power potentially.
Depends on how the tech is evolved. It could be hyper localized, and that's I think that's a better future for all. If you have hyper localized energy production, and certainly a lot of rural, remote communities in Australia have gone hyper localized because they can't. The infrastructure getting from Sydney or wherever the power base is out to these tiny communities is ridiculous. So they need to be self-sufficient, whether it's through renewables, typically through renewables, or their own sort of gas feed is what's there. So for abundance, I reckon localized energy production is an abundant future. But I don't know enough about the tech to say, is that possible?
No, I think what you're going to see though, like, obviously, you mentioned before about currently tech companies investing in things like what they call small modular reactors, SMR nuclear reactors, which is actually still a largely unproven technology. And I'm not sure whether or not really how much of it will actually come to fruition. I think at the moment, tech companies need to be seen to do something about power security or energy security, because they want to build data centers, which are sucking up a huge amount of energy from the grid. And if they weren't shown to be doing something, then people are like, hang on, what about my power and blackouts in my house, which is actually happening in places in the US and stuff already. Whether or not they will actually, the technology doesn't exist. It's not commercial as of yet within Western nations, at least. And it would be at least a decade or more before the first one gets built, right? So that's the first thing. If we applied that same type of timeline, though, to what's currently being built, which is this abundant free energy in nuclear fusion, the first reactors that get built are going to be massive and clunky, just like the very first nuclear reactors kind of back in the 1950s and 60s. It could be another 50 or 60 years before that technology is scaled down to something that becomes distributed, becomes big at the base of a distributed system. So and as you said, throughout that whole process, as you pointed out in this, the person who has access to the supply of energy becomes in some ways incredibly influential from a power perspective as well.
Yeah. And I said
another one I picked up on here was, and I don't know if you must be aware, like we talk about these kind of the domes that we're going to build on the moon and on Mars. And driven in the 1990s, I think it was, they had the biosphere experiments that they ran.
Yes.
Yeah. and so they were trying to build a fully self-sustained environment. And I think they put 8 scientists in. It was a massive fanfare. These guys are going to go into this dome and they're going to live in this dome for like, I think the idea was it'd be 5 years, like it's an extended period of time. It was about the social dynamics and all the rest of it. And I think that they lasted less than a month
No,
before the whole.
they were in
Okay.
there for a while. So
Oh,
they
were
were
they?
in, yeah, a year, year and a half at least. Yeah.
But was it the issue? Is it social issues, or was it the dome actually started? Like they couldn't actually be fully self. I thought there was only a few, like it wasn't even a month before they actually had to break the seal because they didn't have everything they needed inside the dome.
There was that. So they did send somebody out who had a major accident. So that was one of the first things that they did. And the other thing they depended on was a massive generator, which was, that was the other thing. That was the other problem with that. So they had this big diesel generator to keep them supplying power. The idea of having a whole mini biosphere inside the dome didn't work out so well. They worked out like it's really hard to micromanage nature, and they had things they hadn't anticipated, like a lot of slime on the walls. They had a lot of problems like that because they couldn't just micromanage all the elements of having plants and animals and water flows and stuff. And they couldn't grow enough food either. So they got really, really, really skinny. So they did last 12 months. And socially, they ended up in two factions, 4 against 4. And outside, the project manager, or I can't remember their title, was arrested for corruption or violence or something. So the police ended up on site arresting the CEO, I think. It was just a basket case of things.
Yeah.
So it just proved how hard and incredibly difficult it is to recreate a whole planet-based system in a microcosm like that, which makes communities on the moon and Mars just seem incredibly far-fetched. You're going to have a lot of input of resources before it even gets anywhere close to self-sustaining.
Yeah, and this is one of the reason I kind of raised it was because you mentioned earlier on that the more you've investigated this, the less confident or less optimistic you feel. And is this one of the things that you feel less optimistic about? Can we actually really build a self-sustaining community on another planet or on the moon?
It might be possible, but it's going to take generations, decades, hundreds of years possibly. And a lot of things are going to go wrong. A lot of people will die setting this up because not much needs to go wrong on the moon for you just to have an implosion. You just have penetration of your habitat and you're all gone, like dead in moments, really, because as your atmosphere vents out, you're just gone. So in doing this research, I realized how incredibly fragile the human body is and how incredibly amazing it is, this planet that has allowed us to evolve to be walking around, feet on ground, breathing air, drinking water, eating food in a way that is this interconnected miracle, and trying to do that in space is just mind-boggling in terms of its complexity, things that we don't even know. After a year in space, there's so much damage to the human body from radiation, from lack of gravity in our systems, from blood pooling, fluid pooling in our eyes. We lose eyesight, exposures to cancers. Like there's a lot of challenges. So I think the future of human exploration is going to be cyborg or robotic. And just because the human body is so fragile, I think the future of humanity off-world is probably going to be more cyborgy with a little bit of flesh, maybe, in order to withstand the rigors and potential challenges of living in that kind of environment. So the Doppelbots, who in my books are basically humanoid robots, they get sent by the Chinese to build a base on Mars. And they're there for 10 years building this base and operating and doing just fine, thank you very much, because they don't need air. They need power, which they can get from the sun and from their nuclear generator. I don't know if they probably have a helium-3 generator there. I didn't really go into that. But they don't need much. They don't need water, but they're just building everything at their own pace without any risk to human life. So and the Mars Accord in the book is like, let's not send any more humans there because it's too risky, too expensive. We can send bots. It's fine. To set everything up. So that, I think, is the potential possibility, but it's going to take a long darn time and a lot of resources and willpower to do it. Meanwhile, people are dying here, and that's the constant battle. It's like, how much are we investing in our future off planet while neglecting or not addressing the issues here?
Yeah, so I think that's to me feels like a really important conversation that's emerging at the moment. Like it's almost the novelty of the Elon Musk announcements about we're going to be going to Mars have kind of just worn off a little bit and people are like, hang on, but wait a sec. What does that actually mean in terms of the energy and time and resources that gets put into something like that versus why wouldn't we make the world itself a more safe and inhabitable place immediately? And obviously, that doesn't answer some of Elon Musk's perspectives around an asteroid hit, I suppose. But it feels, on the other hand, entirely much more achievable given that complexity. It actually brings in, I don't know, a couple of books that I'm not sure if you've read. The Douglas Rushkoff's book, Survival of the Richest.
No, I've read that one.
Okay, so he has a great podcast as well called Team Human, but he was kind of like, I suppose, a techno advisor. He tells this beautiful story of being invited to go and speak at a conference. And, you know, the conference was going to be in the Bahamas or something like that. And he gets invited off and he lands in this airport and then suddenly like he's met by this person who then puts him on a private plane and he gets flown to a private island with these billionaires there. And what they actually want to ask him is how are they going to protect themselves when the apocalypse happens? So we've built these bunkers and we've done all this stuff, but what is to stop the security cards from just taking over? Like if money's not worth anything.
Mm.
And he's like, he was completely blindsided because he goes like, I didn't think I was coming to do this talk, and I'm not even sure I really like wanted to. He goes, but like, well, the easiest thing would just be nice to them now, you know, like that was his kind of answer. But one of the things he goes through in this book was this idea of like, we ignore the fact that you've built these bunkers, but you still have outside people come in and change the air filters and do this other stuff, and like there is a massive network of support that must exist for those bunkers to exist. And again, it kind of almost speaks a little bit about this is like we underestimate the complexity of what's required to be able to make this stuff work.
Yeah. Yeah. A huge amount of resources.
Yeah. And the other book I'll throw in there, which again, just because I think you would love it, one of my favorite books and my favorite authors is Ben Elton. So Ben Elton wrote The Young Ones, Blackadder, and a whole bunch of TV show stuff. He's done musical theater and everything, but he wrote a series of books that all kind of sit in that kind of, I suppose that it's techno dystopian space, science fiction or speculative fiction space. So he did one called Stark, another one called Gridlock, but the one that relates very much to this is one called This Other Eden. And I believe it was written about the same time and inspired by some of the stuff that happened with the biosphere experiments. And he talks about this fictitious future where, you know, people almost start giving up on climate change and start just building those biospheres in their backyard. And, you know, but he does a great job, if you've ever seen things like The Young One or Blackadder, this satirical perspective that he brings into it, which I think is very powerful as well. We're kind of running out of time, which seems disappointing because I feel like there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
But, one, before we go, I do feel I said I was going to actually start the end, and now we're going to have to end with the end. But let's go to the very last lines of your scenario. And he hears this kind of voice in his consciousness, memento mori, Ellison, memento mori. Do you want to explain what is this to you?
So I first came across memento mori as, whether it's myth or fact, don't know. But when Roman generals used to go for a triumph into Rome, they were pulled along in this little carriage, and they had a slave whispering in their ear saying memento mori, memento mori. And the idea here is to remind the general that they are human, they will die, because getting all these accolades and all this astounding recognition is guaranteed to ramp up your hubris. And hubris is the downfall of everyone in power. So it's the idea of just stay humble, you too will die. There is a finite end to your journey as a human. So that's the origin of it and what it means to me. And it's kind of speaking a little bit to, should we just not invest our future into planet Earth? I kind of vacillate between the two ideas of, we're creatures that are born onto this planet. This whole ecosystem is part of us. We are part of it. Our future and our fate is attached to it. Surrender to that. Memento mori. Versus our future can survive and go beyond this planet, go to Mars. So I kind of oscillate between the two. Should we just be fatalistically attached to our planet and just focus all our energies on that? It will boil dry in 2 billion years if something else doesn't wreck it. There is a finite end to this planet. That's, it's the sun will expand and consume it. So that's kind of a 2 billion year old fatalistic version of that. And at the same time, well, that's sad. What if we need to get out of the solar system because the sun will consume us as we go forward? Shouldn't we try and continue to be part of consciousness? So I kind of vacillate between the two. And the whole idea of managing from hubris to humility is the leadership challenge for all of us. And I think that is one of the antidotes to power, is staying humble and curious. And that is one of the future of power requires us to stay humble and curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had similar, internal dialogues as what you're talking about there. And my increasingly, and again, I don't know if it's just a sign of, getting older and slowing down myself, but kind of also wondering whether or not, sure, these are some things that we need to address, but we don't have to address them now. That almost we're kind of rushing the process a little bit, that the process of getting off Earth or setting up an outpost on Mars, maybe that should be a 5,000 year goal rather than a 50-year goal. That there isn't the urgency now. The urgency now is actually in creating a sense of harmony and being able to live within our means on the planet that we've got. That would feel like the more urgent thing. And once we have shown our capacity to do so at a global scale, we've shown there are indigenous groups around the world who've shown that they can do it on a local scale, but we haven't shown yet that as a race we can do it at a global scale. If we can do it at a global scale, then I think we'll be a much better position then to be able to go, okay, and so what next? And I do feel like sometimes in the futurism space, like it feels like it's pushing us forward at an ever increasing speed, and that we're not actually better for it. That maybe we do need a little bit more time to spend in contemplation and slow development rather than trying to just rush to the end game.
I don't know if I have a time scale attached to my desires, because I would love to see humans land on Mars, just as a curiosity thing more than anything else. And I also want to see people and communities living harmoniously with each other and the planet. So I have those two ambitions. And it's not time, I think, that constrains me more. I think when it comes to the future of power, power needs to be shared. And that's a challenge for us. So the future of power is collaboration. And collaboration is freaking hard. It's really hard. And it's going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, sitting with, these are my rank values, those are your rank values. How do we bridge that? How do we find a way forward together? That hard, heart-centered work is the work that we need to take in order to us to move through these complex challenges. And I think that's where we need to put our work and effort into, is learning how to do that. Because when we can do that, we can tackle a lot of the complex systems challenges that we're facing. But it starts with listening and understanding.
Yeah. So one of the things I asked you to kind of just ruminate on before the podcast recording was, within this is obviously a space that you have thought about a lot, like not just in the sense of this particular scenario, but in the sense of a series of books, in terms of like this is a journey that you said you've been on for the best part of a decade. What do we do about this challenge of power? And as you rightly point out, some of these things are significant in terms of their complexity and their challenge. And yet somehow we also need to bring it back to what is it that someone could do now, like could do today, if we were subtly to try and shift our world towards one, like you use the words like, say, collaborative, but it feels like that's just one aspect of this. What advice would you give to others in terms of how do we nudge the world in the right direction towards one that allows power to be used in the right way or to be, to the right end?
So it goes from the hyper personal to the bigger systemic. So the hyper personal was whenever someone says something that pushes all your buttons and makes you jump into judgmentalism, frustration, anger, whatever it is to sit with that, lean into that, get curious about that. Try and imagine what it'd be like to be that person developing those value system and those beliefs and find a modicum of empathy for them. And then secondary part to that is to think what is useful and valuable from that point of view. There's got to be a strength in it somewhere. What strength is it bringing to the table? So that is actually incredibly difficult work. So that would be the micro personal element of it. From the systemic point of view, I'd be like, let's see how our institutions are being led and managed. Are they in service to the greater good? Or are they creating more us and them? If they're creating more us and them, get active, get proactive, get political, and try and influence that. Add your voice to those, to others who want to create a better world for all of us, not some of us.
I think the very act of using your voice, we sometimes think that, but what's one voice amongst thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of voices? But I think the very act of using it reminds you that you have it to be used in a way, like it reminds you that you're an active player in this, because the very act of being active reinforces the need for it to be so, if that makes sense. Yeah. Finally, look, and I kind of feel like it's almost an unfair question to ask because of the amount of work that's gone into this concept for you well before I asked you to come and go on the podcast. But I've asked this of everyone. It's like, hey, what did you take away from this process? Was there anything in particular that was either through the development of the scenario or through our conversation that's probably either shifted a perspective that you have or provided an aha moment? And again, on one hand, I was like, I've got zero expectation because I know how much you've already done in this space before I contacted you a couple of months ago. But is there something that stands out? Like what's it been like for you to go through this as a scenario process, perhaps versus how you've gone around writing your books previously?
Okay, so I'll answer first part of that question, which is what's shifted for me. I think asking that question, what needs to change and how do we change a system? I think, which is a big, fraught question. And I think that is where I think slowly, carefully is that sort of making me want to explore that a little bit further. And first of all, wanting to go and map the integrated systems and the challenges that we face and ask that question. How might we affect that system? What are the levers we can play, pull and press, and should we? And what could be the unintended consequences. So doing that.
Yeah, just through using, you've had your own processes of writing and stuff before. You mentioned earlier that you quite liked I provide both like a manual and a kind of chat-based approach to going around scenario writing. Did that shift anything in terms of your own, thinking about how you approach these kind of scenarios or writing fiction in this space?
So the questions that you provided to help generate content or ideas for the scenario and using it in conversation with an AI was definitely something that shifted my thinking around this. I'm like, well, this is an accelerated way to get people to think in a systemic way so they don't have to absorb and consume so much. Like you and I were talking before we hit record around that, this in terms of the future of podcasting and the future of conversations, there is less of a drive to consume, to read, to listen, to whatever, in order to feel ahead. And the idea that we can have a thinking partner such as ChatGPT or whatever AI you've got to skip past the consuming all that content to distill it to play with ideas, I think is a radical new idea that I think is going to help do the S curve as you talked about. So not exponential, but S curve. I think we're into the S curve bit now of how information consumption will shift to information processing and deduction to exploring new ideas. And I think that's actually pretty exciting.
Yeah. So we did talk about that previously because I hadn't mentioned, obviously, you have your own podcast as well, which again makes you ridiculously overqualified to be here talking about science, like scenarios on mine. But again, the style of yours is similar in the sense that it's a conversation. It's in conversation with somebody. It's not like a rapid fire series of bullet points that's being kind of hyper compressed to get as much information into a 10-minute slot as possible. It's like, oh no, this is an exploration that requires time. And changing our mind and integrating new ideas into our thought systems takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I feel like that seems important in terms of that. Yes, moving from this concept that we're in this somehow exponential growth of ideas and information and energy and all the rest of it to a plateauing and a stabilizing, which I think we need. Zoe, thank you so much. I really love the way you showed up as well. Like, I like that you challenge my ideas as we go through in this. I kind of really value that. I feel richer for having had this experience of having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for making time. And it's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. Likewise, Simon, this has been really enjoyable to riff with you and to lead into some of this stuff and to have a think about what we could create together. And I think collaboration is the way forward. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here in collaboration, in conversation with you. It's been a joy.
Thank you. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks so much for listening in. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 16. Until then, take care. Bye. Well, that is all for this week's episode of The Future with Friends. If you've enjoyed the episode and you want to support the show, the number one thing you can do is share it with your friends. In fact, it would give me no greater joy than to think in a small way the conversations I'm having with my friends could be a positive influence on the conversations that you are having with yours. Other ways to support the show include going onto the podcasting platform of your choice and giving us a rating. Obviously, I would like it to be 5 stars, but you should ultimately do whatever feels right for you. And if you don't feel quite ready for that yet, if we're not at that point in our relationship, the other thing you can do is send me small gifts in the mail. I always enjoy receiving them. Well, that is all for this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with the next episode. And so until then, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again.